Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a wonderful day ahead of you. Today, in Everything You Need to Know, I take a look at all the 8 games in some level of depth and draw a variety of conclusions to help build my ultimate free hit 34, which I showcase at the end. In addition, this video is being filmed for the end of the game week. Arsenal Crystal Palace are to play after I film and edit this. So this video will be released after. So in terms of the rank and the team on screen, that is again subject to change given the final game. But aside from that, the rest of them, the other 9, shall stay the same. And there's a poor bench boost in the end with only 10 points. But we can discuss that more in team selection tomorrow. If you have been enjoying the content around here, then make sure to subscribe. And equally, if you enjoy the video, then do drop a like on it. I would be greatly appreciative. Without anything else needing to be said, however, get into it. Now, what I will say before I start any particular analysis of a game is that there is a certain level of depth to these, but maybe not as much as you have seen in the past on this channel. Because as I mentioned in transfer plans, I'm not in love with this game week as I was maybe with game week 29. I think there are so many variables that almost cancel each other out and make it so much harder to predict who's going to do well this week in comparison to something like free at 29, at least for myself in the way that I interpret this set of games, that I don't want to jump the gun too much and stick my neck on the line for the sake of doing so. So some places there won't be so much analysis, some it'll be a bit more on the fence, but I've tried to draw whatever conclusions I can and present themselves to you. So it's more so an open discussion as opposed to me being like this, as maybe I have done in some previous videos. Let us start with Chelsea versus Everton. One thing I spoke about with Omar Marmoush in this particular double game week game, is that he was able to generate chances even though stylistically the fixture didn't suit him through his ability. Now, do I back Chelsea to necessarily do this, or like maybe Nicholas Jackson, who occupies a similar position to do that in this Everton block? No, not really. Until James Tarkowski got injured, and I think that's a big deal. And all of a sudden, and I mean this with the greatest respect, I think Everton have some point of weakness within their side. For example, Marmoush took advantage of Keane when that ball bounced and he wasn't strong enough to deal with it. There were a couple other rush challenges and decisions from himself. So if Palmer is able to get like in that zone and operate there, even if it's through an assist like playing it into Jackson, I think Chelsea could profit. And all of a sudden, following that injury, I'm a little bit more bullish on Palmer's prospects as a result of that. Moving on to something which is maybe not so positive, how is he really able to generate assists and is it very likely? Well, when you look at Jackson's shooting, and I specifically say shooting as opposed to finishing, because it's not just him like being in front of goal and then striking wide, but it's also the technique in which he is taking the shot, shooting from a variety of different angles and situations, which really doesn't fill me with confidence that he's going to start scoring goals again. If I look at other strikers who have dipped out of form, even like let's say Erling Haaland, who's definitely been in a bad patch of finishing during his career at Manchester City, even if it is for a short period, you kind of knew he would bounce back because the technique was sound. Whereas with Jackson, I don't think so much. So, as a result of that, does Palmer's assist potential, is it ever really going to rise? I'm not so sure when he's got Jackson in this type of form, at least. Then, if he is to stray towards the left-hand side, and let's just say Sancho plays against Everton, which he may very well do, I also think that like having him on the left, just given the type of player he is, and what we saw, for example, in the game against Spurs, means it's quite unlikely that he's going to generate an assist in that fashion. Now, maybe from the right, if he is to like pop up in those areas at times and be like Neto or Madueke, who have better ball strike and are more willing to engage in, let's say, a goal-scoring action compared to someone like Sancho, then yeah, maybe. But I don't think he'll occupy that position as much as maybe I would like. So that's something to consider as well, right? In terms of the game and the result, I think the momentum that Chelsea will take from their last win, or our last win against Fulham, is a big deal. Because I feel like if we drop points there, with how everything was going, and our fixtures to finish the season, it was looking very difficult to get top 5. But now with that win, I feel like there'll be a real good feel factor around the place. I think people will probably expect us to win this game and win games going forward, and almost just get top 5. And I think maybe Villa and Forest might miss out, so we'll see about that. We obviously play him on the last day. So I think in that sense, we're going to get the job done and win. And you probably assume we score like maybe a couple goals as a result. A couple of things to look into, which are more of the narrative sort, but some people like it. So up. One, the early kickoff. Probably not the greatest thing for him, but never know. maybe like a change in time is what he needs to finally get some returns. Obviously, the night hasn't worked for him in the Conference League. The day hasn't worked for him, so maybe the early afternoon works. And then secondly, he scored 4 goals in his fixture last time around. Some people really like this type of thing, so I thought I'd bring that up. One thing he does have over most players, though, especially with how good he is on the bonus system, is the ceiling. And if he is to, I guess, return or just have a good day in general, you could see a big score. Whereas there are other free hit options that I've seen, specifically some forwards who people are thinking in place of him maybe, that would say, even if they did return, they're probably only going to get 1 and they're not so good on the bonus. But all of a sudden, your ability to hit that high ceiling and get more points is reduced, right? Move on to a discussion about Chelsea's defence. If you are to go for one, I really think Marco Correa, given the fact that he is most likely to score a goal, makes a lot of sense. I would say, though, Everton do have a goal in them, and I'm not so keen about going Cucurella. I considered it in transfer plans, but I'm not so keen anymore. One reason being, well, the only reason being, I think Everton definitely do have a goal in them. Better was also rested against Manchester City. I expect him to start this game. Between himself, maybe a cameo from Alcaraz, Iliman Ndiaye, and Decore against the Chelsea defence that is not as stable as I would like, and the system always gives you a chance. I think for me, if I'm going to go here, it's just Palmer or bust. Now, you will notice that a lot of this section was about Cole Palmer, and the reason being, outside of Cucurella, who I touched on, I don't really think you're going to be going anywhere else. I think the Tarkowski injury is such a big deal, and I think the win against Fulham is also a pretty big deal as well. And for those reasons, I'm more bullish on Cole Palmer now than I was previously, even knowing that he's not in the best run of form, just because I think the conditions are there slightly more, even though it's not the easiest game to return, right? Everton's difficult. We've spoken about this so many times since Moyes has come in. Even with that factor, I think there's enough now to make the pick more justifiable than it was a couple of days ago, to myself at least. Moving on to Newcastle versus Ipswich. And we shall start with Ipswich's particular weakness against Arsenal, and that was their left-hand side defending. Now, obviously, there's no Leif Davis for this game because he got sent off, which makes it even weaker. But on the flip side, you also must consider not only Arsenal's right-hand side strength in terms of the personnel, like they have the second best right winger in the league. You've got Odegaard down that side as well. White, who was playing that game, has such brilliant on-pitch relationships with both of them. I'm sure they get on off the pitch as well, but that's not the point. And as such, like, to contain that is very difficult. So I think we must appreciate that. Secondly, we must appreciate how, in terms of the system and the chain and the structure, it is very much right-hand side orientated and geared towards that side as opposed to the left. So many times we've spoken about how Martinelli, a passer close to him, how he's so isolated on the left, how he's really just restricted to holding the width as opposed to being someone who like penetrates that last line and would find himself in the half spaces far more in the season where he scored quite a few goals. So that is something to consider, and there's almost a caveat to the weakness we saw from Ipswich's left side in that game. But I would say the point still stands because it's not like this is the only time that's happened, and they still did really struggle against that Arsenal right side of attack. And for that reason, and the fact that I prefer his expected minutes to the left wingers who I think are battling out for one spot this game, I really like Jacob Murphy for this fixture. I also think he's a bit of a flat track. Fully like hauled twice against Leicester, hauled against Ipswich. Now, I'm not going to say like Palace and Man United come under that flat track bully condition, but they didn't exactly perform particularly well when they rocked up to St James's Park in Game Week 32. So when it's not like, let's say, the toughest of games, he's certainly been performing. That's not to say he hasn't been performing in the other games. It's just when it comes to the output level in FPL, he's really put those teams to the sword. And given I prefer his expected minutes, as I think the other two are competing for the same spot, I really, really, really like him. And I think he'll be a lock in my side. And whilst we're not going to speak about captaincy in this video, I thought I'd save that for solving your problems. He genuinely is a contender for myself. And then the other one, right? Because I am actually considering triple Newcastle attack, as you will see in Free Hit 34, or draft of Free Hit 34. Given the run-in, I think having, and the fact that it's not easy for Newcastle, I think having a fit and firing weapon in Anthony Gordon is very useful, and just useful in general to have, right? It seems like a decent game to reintegrate him on one hand, right? Give him like 60 and then go from there. It's, with all due respect, the easiest game you're going to have for the rest of the season. It's also at home, which definitely helps. But do you trust him from the off? Every game until the end of the season is a must-win game with huge, huge, huge implications. Ipswich also have nothing to lose anymore, right? Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, however you interpret it. So Whether he starts or not, I'm entirely sure, but not entirely sure. But that's kind of the point. I'm not super confident in either of the expected minutes as such. Is he even fit enough to actually start a game? Who knows? And it's not like they'll tell us the truth anyway. Moving on to Ipswich, they concede a lot of cutbacks, and we've seen that so many times this season. So I would say, think of those who arrive in the box really well. For example, Sandro Tonali's actually got quite a good habit of this. Even Bruno Guimaraes, not to the same extent, but maybe, and potentially wanted to take a punt there, right? Just something to consider. But even someone like Jacob Murphy or Alexander Isak, who will be there anyway, and they just have a good knack of being in the right place at the right time, but specifically in the right place because they're already in the box. I think that bodes well for them. And lastly, I was much high on going Tino Livramento when I filmed with Jack, for example, on Fantasy Football Hub, as opposed to how I am now. Because one thing I did realize with Newcastle is, whilst they won't face the same problems they did against Villa, there is probably at least one or two times that Ipswich can be able to play out that Newcastle press. And when they do, they could create a good chance from it as such. Enciso, for example, looked lively against Arsenal. And then you'll obviously, you probably have Liam Delap if he's fit enough. And then talking about the striker, with his level of physicality, I think you can cause Burn and Shaw some big problems. Yeah, they're like, for example, Burn's really tall, Shaw's quite strong, but I wouldn't say they're the most physically dominating pair, even given like their size or their frames. Like I think about Van Dijk and Konate or Saliba and Gabriel, and I'd much rather have them dealing with Delap than Shaw and Burn. Again, they're bad. I just think Delap could get the better of them. And in one instance, like just one instance throughout the game, I think he can get the better of them to the point that he'll score. Or he could score, right? That's a better way to phrase it. So I'm not as high on going Tino Livramento, and certainly not as high on going double Newcastle defence as I've seen some others do. I like Liverpool's prospects for this game quite a lot. Firstly, the Spurs defence is poor. Now, I don't really think that's a personnel thing. I think that's more of a system thing, what they're asked to do. But nonetheless, as a defensive unit, I think it's poor. And as such, they just concede a lot of chances, which is a good thing for Diaz, Salah, and co. A big thing about looking at this game with the free hit is the fact that it's very likely to be a title procession, right? And I think what that does to the game is it changes the dynamics. Usually, like, you have an isolated fixture. For example, like, I don't know, Ipswich Arsenal, largely an isolated fixture. Yes, there's the variable of rotation, Champions League and whatnot, but it's still more isolated than this. Whereas I think this is a very special fixture and will have a feel to it like no other, and external conditions like no other, because it is going to be the game that after decades, the title goes back to Anfield with the crowd in the stadium. And as such, I think the energy around the place, and that's a big thing with Anfield, right? We've seen like how powerful it is. The speed at which the game is played because players feed off and that, just like the exhilaration, like the feeling of exhilaration, and how that all translates to the game, I think will be a big deal. And I think you'll see Liverpool come out the blocks quick, a quick game in general, a game with speed, and a game where Liverpool aren't just looking to win like 1-0 and then, we won the league, but rather like put a few goals past, entertain them, and win the league in a really good way. Okay, and I think that's a very fair statement to make, considering the unique conditions of this fixture. And Spurs do a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful part, particularly in Ange Postecoglou's side, in participating in an event like that. Because look at the way they play, right? That is real rock and roll football. And if there's anyone to tango with in a way whereby you want a game that is as exhilarating as this one could be, well, it's Spurs, right? And that just means there's transitions galore. And that is where Liverpool thrive and where Spurs and concede numerous goals given how open they are in that sense. So there's a lot of goals on offer, I would say, in this game. Now, can Spurs score? Yeah, they can. But similar to Parma, they seem to have a bit of a black cloud over their head. For example, against Forest, honestly, they were probably the better team. I didn't think Forest were particularly good. They had so many big chances, and if it wasn't for Sells or Harry Toffolo off the line, they'd probably lose that game. Or if Spurs' finishing was a little bit better. Just think of some of the chances like Charlison missed in the first half, or a couple other big ones in the second half as well. So, for all those reasons, I do think that they're going to lose, but they still have a goal in them, right? That's just something to consider. I have seen some talk about going against Mohamed Salah, but for me, when the floor is so high this game, and his ceiling relative to other people's is always going to be high, I wouldn't say it's as high as it could be just because he's a bit out of nick, but I guess it's a good game to get back in form. I wouldn't really say there's much point in going against him, because even if you do go against him, I don't think you can win by too much unless he gets like only an assist and you pick up like an 18-pointer like Mbeumo's this game week. Then okay, yeah, fine, but it's just so unlikely. I feel like you're taking on such a big risk, not that much upside, especially when you'll be captain by so many. And that's the other thing, right? You're not taking on Salah once, you're taking him on twice in many people's teams because he'll be captain. Diaz has looked good as of late, and I think he's got a similar floor to Salah this game, assuming good expected minutes. Not quite the same, but a good, similar-ish floor nonetheless. Brent has grown on me, even though I think they might concede, and it's a game where they could concede, but he's just so very good, and I've used this as my justification for plays in the past. Even from these like low probability situations, us on the slide, he's got the ability to create and produce because he is, like I said, just very, very, very good. And one of the world's best in this position, if not the world's best, and probably the greatest creative fullback of all time. But that just kind of seem like they're there for the taking as well, right? I wouldn't be surprised if he hauls. Yeah, they could concede, but he could still pop up with an assist or an attack and return, and it would almost nullify that. So he's certainly grown on me, and I do like Liverpool's prospects for this game. Moving on to the first game of Super Sunday, and it's an important one for the side chasing European football. Bournemouth's system is something very interesting because there's been a lot discussed about it this season, how it's quite irregular for a side pursuing European football in terms of what they employ and what they do, and yet it's seen such great success this season, and it's being done by a side that isn't traditionally competing for these type of spots, which is another reason why I think it's got so much of this, right? And deservedly so. However, we have seen with systems like this in times gone by where the players start to tail off, and sides start to tail off a little bit towards the end of the season, if not a lot, due to the physical demands it places on them. And I do wonder if their recent crop of results not being as good as they were in the earlier parts of the season has something to do with this. And maybe the signs aren't so obvious, as is the case with many things, not just to do with football. They are there and they're kind of loitering. This is just something to ponder, the theory, but something I think worth pondering. Moving on to something that I think could be good for Bournemouth, specifically Kepa, more so Kepa than their defence, is United's finishing deficiency. Because I feel like they actually are good enough and they put in good enough performances whereby they create enough in the final third to win games. I win games somewhat handsomely, but their finishing deficiency, they really have. Or even if it's not actually the finishing part, but just the understanding of where to be and when to be there. Like, for example, Alan Shearer on Match of the Day spoke about this with Højlund. An early, 1 second late, and all of those things and associated to that just results in them not scoring many goals. But given they are likely to create some chances and have some shots and goals, I think he'll be good for Kepa's ceiling. And well as a decent clean sheet prospect, also a decent prospect at getting a haul and not just 6 points. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12's a bit of a stretch, but maybe 11 at best. And then the other thing is, when they went to St James's Park, we obviously saw them concede goals, resulting in Newcastle's high press and their poor ability when playing out. And a lot has been said about their build-up structure and their use of their central centre-back and the manner in which it's used and how it's the most efficient use. Width, not so much width, but the height of their wing-backs being far deeper than others. For example, I think of Palace when they built against Brighton, and you see how high the wing-backs are, and you can argue whether that's a good or bad thing, but at least when you get out, then you have more going forward, and it is another route to go long into. Doesn't help with defensive transitions when you use the ball like very early stage build-up, but nonetheless, whereas United are far deeper. So they will probably just absorb more pressure in general because the guys marking them can always step and just keep them in that part of the pitch, right? So how did they fare against that press? Maybe Bournemouth profit and score some goals off that. The other thing is, it's a type of game, and I think everyone will probably agree on this, where Bournemouth could have quite a few shots. And how does Onana deal with that volume? Because he's been prone to an error this season many a time, and given more shots to deal with, it just becomes more likely that he's going to make a mistake. And yeah, that's just something to think about in a way that Kluivert, Semenyo, Evanilson, Dango could all profit from. And then finally, another positive thing about Bournemouth, with their quality of attackers, four I just mentioned in particular, or even like Tavernier as well, or Brooks. I'm not sure if he's fit. Yeah, nonetheless, you understand the current crop I'm talking about. They should probably get a few chances, and they should probably score a couple of goals at least. And can United deal with their overall side's speed of play, physicality, aggression, the intensity, the overall threat from the quality that we discussed? Can they? Because they haven't done so well with dealing that in the past this season. I wouldn't be surprised if this game went in a way where Bournemouth won or drew whilst dominating and getting a bit unlucky, or they actually went on to score quite a few. Obviously, United could win. I just don't think they will. And then last thing is they have one eye in Europa League, and if not more than an eye, right? Like 1.5, we could say. because that is pretty much where the success of this season lies. And to be honest with you, they win the Europa League. Whilst they've been god awful so many other times in the league, I think it's a really it is a really, really good result. But it also, for me, would see the season as a success because you've got a new manager in. He's had time to understand his players well, implement his system. Obviously, he'll do a better job next season, and you give him Champions League football next time around, the money that comes with it, the recruitment, and so on and so on. So yeah, they can just win 3 games of football in that competition. They'll be good to go. The one thing I really like when it comes to Wolves Leicester is actually a defensive double up at the moment of Ryan Aït-Nouri and Nelson Semedo. Firstly, you've got the occupation of the final third, particularly Ryan Aït-Nouri, and particularly his ability in the final third to generate attacking returns for owners. The other thing is they both tend to potentially get substituted a little bit early, and I think that's good for their clean sheet prospects, right? I'd rather have a defender who plays 62 minutes every single game as opposed to 90. Yeah, I might miss out on the possibility of attacking returns. If you're giving me 33% of the game off to not concede, I'm taking that any day. So where they get hooked anywhere between, let's say, 70 and 85, I quite like that as well, especially with the number of late goals, especially this season. I think at least at some point in the early season, there was a lot compared to usual seasons. Whether that's changed, I'm not so sure, but I think it was around game week 9 when Brentford scored late against Ipswich. Well, I got that race in a 4-3 win, but anyway. I think the defensive unit also consists of good enough athletes whereby they'll be able to contain these Leicester attacks. One thing I've noticed, for example, game away at the Etihad, is that they don't have as many numbers in attacks as other teams. They're not really set up in that type of way to be able to even transition in a particularly dangerous manner. So as long as the Wolves are disciplined when they are deeper and Leicester do have the ball and they're a little bit more pinned, I don't see them conceding too many goals in other fashions. And as such, I quite like the prospect of a defensive double up. A big question when it comes to this game is Cunha versus Strand Larsen or Cunha and Strand Larsen. I think it's very difficult. And I think if you were to go to the pair, you wouldn't really be getting less than 10 points. 4 points for appearance, and then I would say one of them probably gets a goal. If one of them gets a goal, you probably don't see them getting less than 2 bonus, and then that's 9. So yeah, roughly like we can points, and I'm only giving them 1 return, right? If I was to go for 1 right now, I think I'm going Strand Larsen. I just think the game suits him a little bit more. And one thing with Cunha, and I have seen it, and maybe this is overthinking it a little bit, and to be honest, I do expect him to return. It's more that I just think Strand Larsen will outscore him whilst they both return. Is that he does tend to score the spectacular, but the more basic goals, the more basic like action, he doesn't seem to do as well as. And there is like a theory of temperament. I was actually thinking about this yesterday, somewhat randomly, but maybe he suffers a little bit from that, where he only really locks in when he feels like it's all on the line for him, or he has to get something done. Whereas in those easier moments when he probably has another one, maybe he's got a little bit, ever so slight of a temperament challenge. But yeah, if I had to go for one, I'd go Strand Larsen, but no one, I definitely can't argue with saying that, Cunha's better. And also, going both, I think, absolutely fine. It's just very much how you interpret the other assets and how much you valued the defensive double up. They're at home, they're in good form, expect them to get the job done. Leicester's quite the opposite. Obviously, some of you a lot of you would have watched their performance against Liverpool, and whilst that wasn't bad, I would say, it was a Liverpool side who are very much on the beach. And on another day, there's a few more goals in that game for the Reds, and it just really isn't going not great. I would say they're worse than Southampton as well. For all those reasons, I think you can definitely look to target Leicester through Wolves. Moving on to Brighton versus West Ham. Look at the space Brian and Mbeumo got against Brighton, right? And I think Jared Bowen could see something very similar, especially because Brighton are now at home and they probably have to force the issue more. I think that could be very good for him. And it's not just that. Similar to my justifications in the past regarding Cunha and the fact that he is just Cunha and what that encapsulates, I very much think the same can and does apply to Jared Bowen because he's so good. He's such a good asset, very good footballer, has more than enough weapons and routes to points to return, and you're giving him conditions which are quite suitable for himself. No one can really argue that he's a bad pick. I know he's not very popular, but I really, really do like him. Now, I specifically put quotation marks around mid-stage building. I didn't know exactly what to refer to it as, but when you think of build-up, you think pretty much close to your own box and taking off the keeper and a 6 drop deep and join with the centre-backs. Whereas what I'm talking about is when West Ham are somewhat pinned with their 5 at the back, but as opposed to them being deep in their half, the ball is more so at the halfway line or a little bit further back. and what Brighton do from those like positions. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a slight tweak in that like build-up structure where one man, instead of constantly receiving off the centre backs, goes between the lines, or another looks to join the forward line or kind of ghost in and around those areas to help connect. And in those times, as a result, I think when they do lose the ball and you see those transitions occur, Bowen would just have more fertile conditions to return and easier ones to do so. They also don't have João Pedro, and they haven't been great against these deep blocks. And I think West Ham could operate with a 5 at the back. And if they do, I think that'll be certainly beneficial for them because, as I've expressed so many times this season, I don't like the 4 at the back because I don't think they've got the midfield profiles specifically physically in which to play it, or at least in terms of their defensive destroyer, like that type. They lack that, in my opinion. So I think this system just actually works better for them, even in terms of their attack, because of what follows and the fact that they have a more stable base and they aren't conceding as many big chances, right? Moving on to more FPL related things. I guess you could say specifically FPL related things directly. I think going for any form of a Brighton asset is a risk, just because they've been conceding a fair number of goals. They haven't been playing particularly well. That can be encapsulated well through what Brighton fans said to Fabian Hertzler when they told him, "You don't know what you're doing," when he subbed Welbeck off. The spread of output you'll see amongst their attackers, and it's just difficult to predict who will get a haul and when they will do so compared to other sides. So in general, for me, I'd be at least very cautious if I was to consider going there, right? Like I really would try and analyze everything and make sure you have a lot of conviction. And yeah, like I discussed, if they are to play a 5 at the back West Ham, I think there's a lot of advantages, not even defensively, but also from an attacking standpoint. And for all of those reasons, I quite like Bowen. And in terms of going elsewhere, like you could go for a West Ham defender. I just think Brighton have quite a lot of firepower. So do you really want to risk it? You could, but I would just certainly apply caution when doing so and really consider the prospects of your asset. Nottingham Forest versus Brentford, the second last game to discuss. I didn't think Forest were particularly good against Spurs, and there's just something to note regarding their form, which hadn't been so good prior to this game either. One thing to discuss firstly is the most popular asset in this game, and that is Bryan Mbeumo. Because if there are to be those quick and open transitions, I think he could certainly really hurt them, as he has done to so many sides this season. Now, I specify the type of transition because I often think it isn't distinguished enough. So, for example, Manchester City. I think one of the reasons they opt for this system where they don't play any wingers and their fullbacks provide the width and they're more centrally compact is so that they concede less transitions. And when they do, they're not of the open nature, right? It's easier for them to recover given the players that they have in their side and almost their need for this. Whereas if they were to have more open ones, one of the players who would profit best off that in the teams that would profit best is probably Bryan Mbeumo and Whistler, of course, as well, who's been an absolute revelation this season. But how many is he going to get? Well, probably not many, just considering the type of football Forest play and how they set up and how, to be honest, they're the ones who are trying to capitalize on these opportunities more than the other way around, which is not something you typically associate with teams flying higher in the table. Moving on to Chris Wood, look at the type of chances Brentford concede, the type of goals they concede, where they concede them. It all bodes well for Chris Wood to return. And I think he's going under the radar a bit. So I would definitely consider one of the best players, or at least one of the best strikers this season. And they always do give you a chance. Aside from that, I would say it's a little bit of a risk to go anywhere else with regards to Forest and their assets, just because you kind of never know who's going to haul, whether it's Alanga or White or Callum Hudson-Odoi. Sometimes it's difficult to predict who starts and what their minutes are, Gibbs, White and Wood aside. And there's a little bit of inconsistency regarding output for all three of the men behind Wood. So that's something to consider. I think stylistically, probably, given that Brentford give up those transitions and dangerous ones at that, and the space as well, Alanga's probably quite well suited to exploiting that. Maybe a left field punt, but just something to consider. And I would say both teams need to win because Brentford are now really going for Europe and they'll probably have an outside chance of getting it. And Forest need to win as well. So depending on game state, you could see it turn a little bit more open, and that certainly bodes well for goals. Finally, to finish, Southampton versus Fulham. Southampton can attack, and they can attack well. Between Matthias Fernandes, Tyler Dibling, even Paul Onuachu, who, doesn't score many goals, but I think certainly causes problems for opposition defenses. Kyle Walker-Peters going down one flank. They have got goals in them, right? And that is something to consider. when selecting Fulham defenders. I do think, however, Sessegnon's in a category of his own, because whenever we do get an out-of-position defender who's in form, who plays for a good side, who's got a good fixture, I think it makes for quite an easy selection. So where he genuinely has an 18 to 21 point ceiling, because I don't think anyone would be particularly surprised if you're like, oh, he got a goal and assist or a brace. Yeah, sure, it's more at the top of his range, but nonetheless, it's still realistic enough. I really like going there. And even the floor, between the clean sheet, a goal, and assist, all being somewhat realistic at least. Again, when you combine all those probabilities, I'd say a floor of 5 points is fair, or a likely floor of 5 points is fair. And I would say it's just a big risk to go against. Almost like the Salah of the midfield category, of the defensive category, for this particular game week. Because Southampton can attack and attack well, I think similar to the West Ham games, they'll have enough shots and force to keep into enough saves, whereby Leonard's got a decent chance, actually quite a big score, should Southampton keep a clean sheet. It's just whether you want to double on Fulham's defence and really commit to that, and then keeping away at Southampton, which I don't think is as rosy. Appears. With the injuries, Raul's expected minutes looks good. Iwobi's have looked good for a big part of the season. And again, it is still away to Southampton. It is still a good fixture. But also, I think there is a bit of that gambling aspect, because you never know quite what you're going to get with Fulham. And you never know quite who's going to end up producing for them. And the fact that their ceilings for their players aren't maybe as high, or the players don't consistently reach them as much as you would like. There is enough there whereby if you were to go for like a double up of a Fulham attack, I don't think anyone could really critique it too much. I would just say make sure you have conviction when going there. Now, I've got a feeling this free hit draft may change quite a few times before I lock in my team for game week 34, but currently this is what it's on. I would say there are about 3 talking points. Why is there no Matthias Cunha? Why is there no Luis Diaz? And then also the fact that I've got Palmer and Barnes in there. The rest, I feel like, given what I've said throughout the video, makes sense as to why I've selected them. So we'll start with Barnes. Barnes is really a placeholder for either himself or Anthony Gordon, whoever I think is going to start, / should I get a leak, probably kind of unlikely, just because I really do fancy triple Newcastle attack doing well in this particular game. Palmer is there because I don't like any other mid enough, and we'll come on to Diaz, to take the risk of going against him, because I feel like it's largely unnecessary. And I do think this might be a decent rebound game for him. That's that. The guy who's closest to getting in the side is Luis Diaz. And I don't really have anything negative to say about him. He just about misses out for that like 5th midfield spot. And the last thing is why say no Cunha. I kind of just prefer double Wolves defense. I think I could get like quite a good score from them. And I don't love any of the other defenses too much. So I've just opted for that. And yeah, that's about it. I'll discuss this in more depth in the team selection, because I don't want to film this, talk about it, and then do it again in team selection. And it's subject to change. So let's see how my thoughts develop between now and the next time I record, which might even be in like 3 hours if I decide it to be. But yeah, that's what I'm currently going with as things stand, but as of course subject to change. And again, drop your teams in the comments below. Just tell me what you got. I'd be really interested to see combinations, ideas, things you feel really strongly about. That I'd love to hear as well. What do you feel really strongly about this game week? Tell me, and I'd certainly love to hear it. And that is all she wrote for this video, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed. I certainly did. It was a different style of video. Did enjoy it. If you did, drop a like on the video and make sure to subscribe as well. I shall see you very soon for team selection, and I hope the final bit of Game Week 33 ended well for you. I just checked whilst I was recording the lineup. So no Bukayo Saka or Ismail Assar or Jean-Philippe Mateta. So yeah, that wasn't what I was expecting. But nonetheless, let's hope somehow it turns out well. I shall see you very soon, and thank you once again for all your support. Goodbye.